All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a country that feels like it's on a razor's edge, where federal actions have sparked a massive wave of resistance that all came to a head in the No Kings protests. We're going to break down exactly how we got here. So let's start with a number, and it's a big one: 9 million. That's the estimated number of Americans who on March 28, 2026, took part in the single largest day of protest this country has ever seen. We're talking people on the streets in big cities and small towns all at once. So you have to ask, right? What gets 9 million people out on the streets at the same time? This wasn't just about one thing. It was a boiling point. And to really get why it happened, we need to rewind the clock just a couple of months. The spark that lit this whole firestorm really goes back to January 2026. A whole series of violent, and in some cases deadly, encounters with federal agents happened one right after the other. These weren't just isolated incidents. They felt like a pattern, and they set off a national outcry. I mean, just look at how fast this all went down. January 7th, Renee Good, a mom, is killed by an agent from ICE. The very next day, boom, 2 more people are shot out in Portland by Customs and Border Protection. Then, just a couple of weeks later, we're back in Minneapolis, and Alex Pretty, an ICU nurse, is killed. When you see it laid out like this, you can understand how a sense of crisis just exploded across the nation. But you know, the shootings were just the beginning. The real explosion happened when the official story from the government just completely crashed into what everyday people were seeing for themselves, on their own phones. So here's the official line. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem comes out and calls the shooting an act of domestic terrorism. She says the agent acted in self-defense, that he had to shoot to protect himself. Super clear, super definitive. But then the video dropped. Bystander footage hit the internet, and it seemed to show something completely different. It looked like Good's car was actually turning away from the agent when he opened fire. And that, right there, just blows the whole self-defense story out of the water for a lot of people. And that's when local leaders started to speak up. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, he saw the video, and he did not hold back. He flat out called the federal government's version of events garbage. And, well, you can read it right there for yourself. It was an absolutely explosive moment. And it wasn't just Minneapolis. We saw the exact same pattern play out in Portland. The Department of Homeland Security says, self-defense, the victim weaponized his vehicle. But then you have local officials and reports pointing out, wait a minute, these 2 people were unarmed. So you've got these 2 totally separate realities being presented to the public. And then this happened, which to a lot of people just screamed cover-up. The U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, a federal appointee, steps in and kicks the state's own investigators off the case. Just like that, they're barred. The FBI takes over completely. So now you have no independent local police agency investigating a shooting that happened in their own city. And that did not go over well. So what happens when people stop believing the official story? Well, in this case, a huge resistance movement started to form. And it wasn't just marches, it was this really smart, multi-layered response happening on the streets and inside City Hall. On the ground, things were happening fast. From a community organizer's point of view, this was pretty sophisticated stuff. People were using whistles and noise as an alert system to disrupt federal operations. You had groups training literally tens of thousands of constitutional observers, basically people who knew their rights and were there to film everything. They even organized these economic strikes, no work, no school, no shopping. And this wasn't random. It was all being coordinated by a huge network of activist groups that had been building this for years. And this fight wasn't just happening on the pavement. You had elected officials pushing back too. Mayors and governors were publicly calling out the federal government's story. Cities like Portland and San Francisco started pulling out of federal task forces, basically saying, we're done cooperating. They were filing lawsuits, and get this, it wasn't just Democrats. You had prominent Republicans stepping up and criticizing the federal actions in their states too. Okay, so this is where we get to the heart of the matter, because this is so much bigger than just protests. This is really a fundamental fight over power, over the law, and over what the Constitution actually means. And it all boils down to 2 really important legal ideas. First up is this term, domestic terrorism. Now, under the Patriot Act, the definition is pretty wide-ranging. It's not a crime you can be charged with, but it's a label. And it's a label that gives federal agencies like the FBI a whole lot of power to investigate people. So when the administration starts calling protesters and even victims like Renee Good domestic terrorists,
It's their justification for a massive federal response. But on the flip side, you got something called the anti-commandeering doctrine. This is a big one. It's a constitutional principle backed by the Supreme Court that basically says the federal government can't just show up and force states or cities to enforce federal laws for them. This is the legal foundation, the shield that lets a city say, nope, our police aren't going to help with your immigration raids. It's how they're able to resist officially.
So you see the collision, right? On one side, you have the federal government using terms like domestic terrorism to expand its reach. And on the other, you have local communities using the Constitution to draw a line in the sand. And it all leads to this one massive question that's being fought over right now in courtrooms and on the streets. Where exactly is the line between federal authority and a local community's right to protect itself? That's what this is all about.